Images of Christ. In our secular society, where interest in church or religious thought is not a priority for most people, it is hard to imagine a time when the church was the center of society and the instrumental for social and political change. Germany, at the end of the 16th century and into the 17th century, had experienced a major upheaval after 1571 when Martin Luther, and not Martin the other Martin, and his 95 Theses led to the Protestant Reformation across Northern Europe, a religious and political struggle that saw a great deal of suffering and bloodshed. The New Protestants were pious people, believing strongly in the message of the Bible and trying to live with godliness, reflecting a deep reverence for God and his manifestations in Jesus Christ. Religious observances were very important to the New Protestants. The new form of Christianity came with a new individualism. Salvation no longer depended on the Pope or supporting the Catholic Church. In 1677, a new hymn appeared for use in the new Lutheran Church, and a hymn that was used by other German Protestant groups, such as the Moravians and the Mennonites. This hymn is Fairest Lord Jesus. The origins of the text are surrounded in mystery. Some believe that it might have been written by the relatively new order of priests in the Catholic Church, the Jesuits. Catholic elements were edited out for Protestant use. Others believe that it appeared much earlier as a German folk song. Legend has it that it was sung by German knights in the 12th century as they marched towards Jerusalem during the Crusades. Hence, the hymn is sometimes referred to as the Crusaders' hymn. The text, translated into English by an unknown translator, is a passionate, devotional expression of the love of Christ, a Christ whose beauty is far beyond anything that nature can provide, even the beautiful countryside and mountains of rural Germany. We will hear the text set to a melody composed in the 20th century, not the traditional German folk song tune that we associate with the words. We will also hear Jesu Joy of Man's Desiring, a chorale tune that was harmonized by J.S. Bach during the same period of the 17th century. The English text is not an exact translation of the German chorale. It was written by Robert Bridges, who was a British poet laureate during the 19th century. The original text expresses the sentiment that no matter how bad life is or how many trials we may face, Christ will be there in the end. From the image of Christ, who is a shining friend that will greet us at the end of our time here on earth, as seen by the German Protestants, we move to the United States and a very different musical expression, the African American spirituals. Such a rich legacy of song and expression of faith under the most severe, unimaginable circumstances. Again, we see the image of Christ who greets believers in another world, a Christ who makes right the great wrongs that were happening in the present world. The spirituals created a powerful, beautiful music of sorrow and at the same time, hope. In the spirituals, the image of Christ could create a sense of immediate freedom in an existence that had no freedom. It's often asked as white Anglo-Saxon Protestants whether we should be performing these songs, but it is so important to keep them alive. And as you listen to the news today, they're relevant. Give me Jesus, a powerful plea as a response to a common tragedy, perhaps the loss of a child or husband to the auction block. We will never know who created the text of the melody or the melody. Steal away a message to follow Christ and a better world will come. More than likely, also a secret message for that very day or night. A message to meet, to learn to read, to come together to pray as a group, or perhaps start a journey on the Underground Railway.
all trembling.
The trumpet sounds within my soul. I ain't got long to stay here. Steal away, steal away, steal away to Jesus. Steal away, steal away home. I ain't got long to stay.
My Lord calls me, He calls me by the lightning.
The trumpet sounds within my soul. I ain't got long to stay.
One of the joys of doing this 27 years later is that when I first used to do this with the UCW, I never had to change glasses. In the Garden, a gospel hymn written in 1912 by C. Austin Miles, a pharmacist turned gospel songwriter. If we had $100 for every time that song has been sung here at a funeral in the last 27 years, we would have a great start on a fund to replace our dear old organ. C. Austin Miles had been reading John 20, the story of the first Easter morning. He dozed off and had a vision of Christ encountering Mary in the garden. When he woke up, he immediately wrote the words for the song and then composed the melody later that day. The images of Christ walking right beside us, not in some far-off place. In some quarters, it is considered more of a secular love song than anything with great theological depth. According to one writer, the song is anti-Christian because it is of the exclusion that it suggests. Not one person has, apparently, experienced Christ in the way that this person in the song has done. None other has ever known. Does that negate many deeply religious encounters that people have had over the years? Many find the text and the melody too sentimental. Yet the song has been sung by many gospel and country stars and has been translated into many languages. Reflect as we sing the piece. How does this image of Christ fit with your image of Christ? The piece was not composed in a time of religious turmoil or in circumstances that we just cannot imagine trying to live under. This Little Light of Mine, another gospel, modern spiritual, was composed by Harry Dixon Lowes in the 1920s for a group of African American children. There is a direct connection with Matthew 5, verse 14, "Ye are the light of the world." This gospel song, Spiritual, became an anthem for the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 1960s. Not waiting to meet Christ in the next world, we are admonished to let our light shine and to get out into the world and make a difference. A move towards a more social and active vision of Christ. When I found that piece last summer, we have wonderful accompanists here, Pat McCormick and many, but I said that piece was composed for Cynthia Davies. Our opening hymn this morning, We Meet You, O Christ, by the great 20th century hymn writer Fred Kahn, definitely creates an image of Christ very much involved in the everyday life, in everyday places and situations. We will close with hymn 117 in Voices United, and again, John Bell, the renowned Scottish theologian and musician, creates a very different image of Christ, a Christ who shows so many human emotions and a Christ very much present in the world today. There is the sense that we are the hands and feet of Christ in this present world. What image of Christ are we creating? This hymn is going to be done just a little differently. Verse 1 is going to be sung by everyone in the congregation and the choir. Verse 2 is going to be sung just by the men in the choir and in the congregation. Verse 3 will be sung by the women. And verse 4 is just going to be sung by the choir, and verse 5 will be sung by all. Just keep in mind this wonderful text. This summer, I'm having the wonderful privilege of studying with John Bell for a week in Ontario. Hymn 117. Our service will end as we take a moment of silence to think about the images of Christ, the great light that will greet us in another place, a presence that will give us solace in times of trouble, the sentimental He meeting us in the garden, or the image of Christ very present in our world, a Christ that we are part of. Perhaps Christ is just a word that we hear on Sunday and have little thought or care about during the other days of the week. We are going to sing the wonderful closing prayer for you. Can you see Christ? I'm going to ask you just to listen carefully to the words, and as we finish, just leave, go over to coffee, cookies, but take the message of the closing music, our choral benediction with you as we go out into the wider community.